you have engagement with the regulators on an ongoing basis. Which are those regulators and what are the current status in terms of the ongoing interactions with those regulators? Only those two issues. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Comrade Chair. I think on my part, the temptation was there to wait until after your responses, but I think I do need to make this point before you respond. That I get the questions that comrades have put to you from different angles, but I would have wished that the opportunity you had to present could and should have been utilized a little much better in terms of detail, especially in the context of the ability to engage as and when you are available, so that it becomes a bit more meaningful. As you recall, when we met in January, the fundamental question was, what went wrong? What happened? And you said to us, look, we also are not sure. We don't know. We're engaging PwC so that they can help us to dig and have a sense. And in our second meeting, PwC was there. They were able to give us a sense of how they want to work, the 14 streams, and how they'll be reporting on each as they complete. And here we are today. So I would imagine that in terms of a presentation, we should be able to get a sense. Look, we now have a sense of what went wrong. It is okay to talk about employment. That was one of our concerns. The issue of the shares is also one of our concerns in terms of the investment. But I think the fundamental question is, what went wrong in the institution? What were the arrangements that became enablers for the issues that are there? And I think if you listen to Comrade Boy's input, I think that was the number of his concern, that when we hear all these other things, but we don't have a sense of what went wrong. And when you deal with what went wrong, that's where now it comes to the actions of individuals and all that kind of stuff. So I think if we had approached it that way, it would assist us so that we don't have an impression that you will give information to the extent that will probe. Otherwise, you will hold back and wait. I would hope that in your responses, you'll just take that into account broadly to say, our interest is what went wrong. What went wrong in the company?
Wilma, do you want to raise anything, please?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. One question. The last time I was here in the joint meeting, what started this whole thing was that your auditors refused to sign off on the financial statements. And normally auditors, when they refuse to sign, they already know what is wrong, which gives them the reason not to sign. So I want to know, what did the auditors say, the various reasons why they refused to sign off, and that why would have helped the company to correct the financial statements. So I still need an answer on why they refused to sign off on the financial statements originally, because those reasons, that must assist you in the future financial years. And soon we're coming to the next financial year, 17, 18, 18, 19 must still be done. So why did they refuse to sign off? We still don't have that answer. Thank you, Chair.
Very quickly, I think Alf covered two of the questions I wanted to ask, but Themba's covered it largely. As chairs, our job is to facilitate. Let's be fair. When you came here in January, we were a new board. You were fuzzy, we understood. We were soft on you, so much so that some members complained about us. The unions were unhappy, and we had to explain to them why. Secondly, you sent PwC. In fact, it was because you said to us that meeting in June will not help. Remember, Themba, you intervened and said, we agreed to a quarterly meeting, and we're not foregoing that. Whatever happens, we need to let everybody know. No matter what the bills are, this issue is too big. Up till the time of the end of this term, sometime in April, May next year, we will have quarterly meetings. Now, we postponed our quarterly meeting in June because PwC said, and Steinhoff, whoever was there, said, you know what, we will not be ready with the interim report. Then we said, okay, 3rd week of August. And because of practical problems, it became the 4th week of August. Now, to be fair to the committee, 2 things have arisen. One, the topic is progress since March. You know, there's no other word to describe it. It'll be remiss of me not to, it's wishy-washy. It's generalities. We're not even clear, as Mr. Lee says, do you or don't you have an interim report? Now, we're also clearer now, and hopefully over the next quarter, about what the legal parameters are of what we can ask you. Now, one of the things I should say as a chair, I think the 3 chairs discussed it yesterday and the ANC met also. We have got clarity a bit more now on what we can ask a private sector entity, which has implications for the public sector employees and other sectors of South African society that the state has to protect. We can ask you more questions than we thought we did. The rules are going to be changed in Parliament in the next term about private sector entities. But at the same time, we have to be cautious that we do not undermine the criminal investigations and the investigations by the regulators, wittingly or unwittingly, by the questions we pose to you, which is why Mr. Jenkins went through the way he did. We can't ask you questions that will become the subject, the lawyers tell us, of criminal and civil proceedings. But the parameters are quite wider now, we're clearer, so we can be more stringent in our oversight. So basically, what are we saying? The co-chair and I are saying one, and I think others are saying it in different ways. There's no progress substantially. You struck the deal with us for the meeting to be held in August. Frankly, there's no evidence why we shouldn't have had it in June. Secondly, you're not helping, and we're worried. You must give us legal arguments for why you won't answer specific questions. You have to give a legal argument why you won't give us names. And then Advocate Jenkins will engage as a lawyer, and then we must decide. And finally, the court decide if you refuse to answer the questions. So, Ms. Son, it's disappointing. It's bordering on demoralizing, actually. And we feel that you're not fully appreciating the gravity of what's at issue here. So we're pleading with you, answer questions precisely. Where you can't, let the lawyer say why they can't. Let Advocate Jenkins say what he wants to say, and let the members decide what we do. Precise answers, please.
There have been quite a few questions, Chair, and I will attempt to get through them as best I can. Whatever I miss, Louis, you can add in, and if there's some to wrap up before we move on to the next item, then we will do that. I first just have to state for myself is that this is certainly not for me a PR exercise. It certainly is not about getting through the process. I think for us, and stepping into the position was precisely because of the gravity of the situation and because of the commitment to see it through all the way, ultimately, until we can have some relief, hopefully, through our processes for the pension funds. That's my motivation. That's why I do what I do. So this is not I don't take it lightly in any regard. I do, however, in my own mind, in thinking about your questions, I do think about all the considerations that we have as a company and what I may say here that jeopardizes our criminal proceedings. And I know we've heard from the lawyers and we've heard your assurances, and I'm constantly hearing the questions, understanding what my position is within the company and trying to filter answers that will satisfy your right to ask these questions but not jeopardize any processes. And only I am in that position to put that all in my head and try and be satisfactory to this committee. So please this gathering, please don't see what I'm doing here as an attempt to try and withhold anything. I'm thinking about all these considerations that we are dealing with on a daily basis. As far as I'll try and group them. So as far as the financial statements go, the company has released unaudited interim results in June. And that is included on page 17 of our report, bullet 3. The half-year results, the income statement for the 6 months ended 31 March 2018 and 2017 restated. The balance sheet as at 31 March and 31 2017 restated, and 30 September 2017. The cash flow statement for the 6 months ended 31 March 2018 and 31 March 2017 restated. The trading update for the 6 months ended 31 March 2018 and the restated 2017 comparatives. And then there was a question as to when we intend, and we did commit this publicly and in this committee, that our commitment was to release the audited results for 2017 at the end of this financial year. That commitment remains in place. End of December 2018. As far as the audited for the current financial year, which is 2018, those audited results are on track to be released at the end of or sometime in January. We don't yet have a commitment of a date. The team is working to satisfy both those requirements, and we can say January 2019 for those audited financial results. In terms of what we are uncovering in the company, in terms of what went wrong, there are indications, and I think the PwC investigation is starting to show us very clearly. And if you look at those restated financial results, you can see what they were previously and what they are now. So you can see the extent of the misstatement and what, or the extent to what we thought it was previously and what it is, and what we've restated it, having reversed some of these calculations. As far as working with PwC and Deloitte, there was a concern where Deloitte had said that it needed PwC's investigation to support its process. The company then took a view that we have to resource up the company's internal team, have them go through each and every item in all our financial statements, have them come up with a draft that then goes to PwC for a full investigation. There's no limit. We said it before, we've said it here again. Unlimited access to the company, no definition on scope for PwC initially, but to put some speed to that process. PwC then has an opportunity to thoroughly investigate those numbers, those draft numbers, and Deloitte will then have an opportunity to review what has been put both by the company and by PwC's findings, and then put its own assurance to those numbers. So as far as that process goes, that was a question that was asked, and that is how the company is addressing that against the deadlines of December and January. So that's as far as that goes. As far as why the audit company Deloitte did not want to sign off on or resisted signing off on the financial statements is that they were going through a process. There were various allegations that came out from various sources. You would have been aware of media reports in terms of question marks around the company's financials. All of this raised some concern. The audit committee of the company also took a look at that, worked together with Deloitte, and asked for audit evidence to support what the concerns were. That audit evidence could not be produced, and that's what led ultimately to Deloitte coming to the position that it said it would not sign off the financial statement. So those were the events that led to that process. It was around that time, on the 5th of December, that PwC was immediately approached to do an investigation. The previous concerns, the company did enter into independent investigations and were given assurances that all the concerns that were raised could be addressed by these independent processes. At this stage, because the audit evidence could not be produced, the decision was then made to not sign off, but instead to bring PwC into the process and to go through a thorough, unlimited investigation. It was at that stage that it was clear that there was something that needed a proper look, and we would follow that process through with PwC. I accept the point on that it's not a voluntary. I understand that we were asked to come here, but after our conversations, we immediately saw it as something that would be useful to both processes, and we agreed to do that, and we will continue to do that. As far as the expectations of this committee, I certainly take a responsibility to ensure that we have a proper engagement before coming here so that we can be absolutely sure which key points, and I think some of them are obvious, but we also need to measure it against the processes and concerns internally, and to have a proper conversation about the expectation of this committee moving forward. I certainly take responsibility to firstly come, and secondly, to be absolutely focused on the key issues that this gathering wants to focus on. I'm just trying to see where... yes, there was a question with regards, but the member's not here at the moment, but he asked a question about the board, the old board and the new board. The board at the time was made up of about 10 members. The change was that only 3 members remained as at that time, and an entirely new board. The rest of the members, I think we're 10 or 11 now, and it was brought on. They served immediately under Dutch law under an NDA, and then were ratified by the shareholders on the 20th of April 2018 as being properly given all their powers by shareholders to act. These are all new members to the board. They've been, as far as do we have the commensurate skills, we looked at each individual person in terms of what their skills are and what they bring. And then as a second look as how that team how they may work together as a team. The one weakness that we determined in the process of moving forward was specific skills around restructuring. We understood that there would be an incredible, and there had been significant engagement with creditors, while all of us applied ourselves as best as we could to those processes. We have now appointed someone in the name of Paul Copley, who has dealt with restructuring in the jurisdictions where our companies operate. That appointment has been made, and we believe that significant, that strengthens the board in an area, and we are constantly looking at what if there are any places to strengthen the board further. That is how we are doing it. In terms of the management board, only one management board member remained, and the rest of the management board members were brought onto the management board. In the NV structure, I think I said this before, there's a supervisor, it's called a binary board, a management board and a supervisory board, and one member of the management board stayed and other members were brought on. I think it is important to note that the company will go through its strategic discussions on Friday. One question was, can this company be saved? I think a question that one asks from time to time is, should this company be saved? And I think we weigh that against all the stakeholders, as we've said before, and whether we believe that there's any value in retaining some core part of the business and continue to grow it. On the first day that I was asked to take this position, I asked for a picture of the person who lost the most, the biggest loser. We couldn't find a picture, but that is the picture that I keep in my mind in terms of who lost, who the pensioner is. And as long as there is hope that we can get to some return for that individual, those sets of individuals, we will not stop trying. And that is this company worth saving or not? We will continue to try. As far as could there be an event in the future which takes it out of our control, like an event of default or a call for insolvency, I think because we have a standstill agreement with the banks, the term sheet, someone asked questions about the arrangements with the creditors. The term sheets are public information. They have been published. And what they allow for are, together with our creditors, arrangements that allow us to keep carrying on in the process of trying to bring down our debt. So they will not, in that period, trigger an event that is out of our control. So I think we have a chance. We will continue to fight for that chance, and as long as that looks possible, those of us who are in these positions, we will continue to drive that process. As far as whether these matters, translate into other companies like Star, which is now renamed Pepco, Star is a separately listed entity, so it has to answer its questions for itself. It is a very valuable asset, so when we think of our options, and we think of selling down debt, and then we think with the ultimate shareholder in mind, and we think about the company as a going concern, we need certain entities that are able to generate cash for us to service the remaining debt. Star is a valuable asset in the group. We continue to look at it. There are members of the Steinhoff NV on that group, on that committee, and as a shareholder, Steinhoff has to keep looking for its own reasons, has to keep looking at the robust functioning of Star. As far as BEE goes, I certainly believe that diversity on boards and bringing various opinions is critical. It helps us to align in the DNA of the organizations, the future that we think is possible. So that's why it is important. It allows us to build sustainability. I can report that the board is significantly diverse, despite the fact that it doesn't have to comply with South African laws in this regard. But we have chosen to do that. Additionally, from an NV or Dutch company point of view, we do not need to have a social and ethics committee. From an NV point of view, we need a governance and ethics, but we have raised the bar as a company and called it a social ethics and governance committee to oversee all of the highest standards that are required from a South African point of view, as well as an NV point of view. So we have raised the South African requirement to the NV holding company. So I think those are some of the ways in which we are looking to see how we build in what we learn in a South African context into a holding company that's Dutch registered. As far as PwC goes, I just state again, it has an entirely open scope, and it has now started to identify it has identified where the core issues are. And it is following the process to determine and uncover more and more of the information that will support that specific case. The focus at the moment is on evidence, so that those processes can be followed. When that information is available, it is handed over. I'm going to ask.
Is it handed over? To who?
take that
Secondly, the question asked by members,
Yeah.
right? Look, I know the three chairs have conferred, right? What we're asking for is the committee to actually, yeah, okay, can I just deal with process, right? Vilma, you'll have to speak first, right? Because you're a co-chair. So the three chairs are suggesting, look, there's a lot of unhappiness even now about the answers to the questions, I presume. But Mr. Ben Lagrange also has to speak. So what we are suggesting is maybe we have Mr. Ben Lagrange give us his 10-minute or so overview. Lawyers have been exchanging with him about the parameters of that. And then we engage with Mr. Ben Lagrange, and then we come back to Steinhoff, right? And then there's another option, which I'm not sure I raised with Themba and Joan, is then we hear from the regulators where things are, because our primary concern is to ensure the regulators do the job. And then we come back to Steinhoff at the end, so that we're able to ask more questions, more nuanced, more precise, and more towards achieving something. And if need be, we expand the time. So we're asking for two things. One is let's hear Mr. Ben Lagrange for now. Let's ask him questions. Let's come back to Heather and them, and come back to them at the end of the meeting, after having other regulators if need be. And two is we're not going to end at 16:30, that we expand the meeting for as long as we need to. So those are the two proposals. Have I got it right, Themba? Right, Joan? Yeah. Okay, Vilma, what do you think? Hang on, I'm coming to you, Nati, on process, right? Vilma, do you agree or not with that?
I agree with you, Chair. I think gathering the information, it's obvious that this information that is gathered, will it be made public? And that's one question for me, but I agree with you, Chair, let we follow those two processes.
So can we go to Mr. Ben Lagrange? What on process matters, Nati had his hand up, then Nyami Boy, then Mr. Mania. On process issues, Tandi. David, do you want to speak on process or content?
Okay. I'll speak on content.
Okay, process issues, yeah. Only process issues, okay. Nati, okay. Do you agree with the broad?
No, I wanted to address myself. Okay.
Yeah, no, I was just checking. Are the hands that are up on process? Do you want to talk on process? Because I thought the suggestion was let's allow Mr. Lagrange to talk to us, and then we can then engage on content.
I certainly wanted to address myself towards the Honourable Chair, Honourable members. Now, and I want to make sure that I understood correctly, because I understood your fellow Chair as saying that we take Mr. Lagrange, we then take regulators, and then we come into a discussion. Is that not the case? Okay.
In case I speak too fast, I apologize for that. I'm saying let's take Mr. Ben Lagrange now, because there are questions that he would answer that would help us in maybe insights into questions we've raised to Mrs. Son. Secondly, we would take further questions to Mrs. Son based on what Mr. Ben Lagrange says. So that's a second bite at Mrs. Son and her team. Then we hear the regulators. We will get insights into where things are. For example, right, just give one example. Mrs. Son claims or says that they are cooperating with the Hawks. Then when the Hawks come here, they will say, yes, we met Mrs. Son on 4 occasions in the last 3-4 months, or we haven't met Mrs. Son. Then we will come back and ask Mrs. Son, but how many times did you meet him? So, in other words, our ability to focus, remember, we're not only concerned with Steinhoff, we're concerned with everybody here. So you will get a chance to ask all the questions you want based on the second proposal we've got, which is we don't end at 16:30 and carry on for as long as we need to.
Thanks for speaking slowly, Chair. Thank you very much, sir.
Agrees with that. Maybe that's the issue.
Chair, I'm happy with your proposal, but I'd like to make an additional proposal. The problem is that we put questions, but those questions are never replied to in detail. My proposal is that the chairs allow a member an opportunity to ask perhaps a maximum of 3 questions, and that the witness then immediately responds to those questions. Otherwise, we're just simply not going to get the kind of responses that we need. Because what the committee and the members are after is detail. What we're getting are general statements. It's like punching jelly, Chair.
People agree with that? Imkoleko?
No, thanks, Chair. No, I'm in agreement with proposal 1 and the addition that has been made. I wanted to just add that when Ms. Son comes back with, we said she'll come at the end again. In the interim, can they actually get themselves occupied with answers to the questions that have been posed already, so that when she does come back, we get in actual detail, the fluff and the generalization. So she has an opportunity now, whilst she can multitask, listen to what she's saying, but actually go back to what she's been asked, so that members don't have to ask the same questions again.
Chair, can I also make a suggestion?
Before you do,
Okay.
no, before
Yeah.
you do, you
Okay.
can't at this stage. It's for Parliament to decide. And then you will respond to what we say. But you can't make a suggestion, no. Nyami boy.
As I said earlier, that let's not build on rottenness of the company. How much is the size of your debt? But you must understand, where our concern on the pension fund and the PIC is to revamp that company. Are you rebuilding or are you transforming on that rottenness? But you are so much indebted and just played around with the money. Is that the same situation that you are seated for?
And I'm asking
Or are you
a
able to
content
give us
issue.
an
We can
insight,
come back to
just
that.
like that?
On process, please, Thandi, we've got to move on.
Process, Chair, you see, David has got a point. There are certain questions that has not been responded to. And those are not legal questions, are questions that will assist members going forward as to what other questions can they ask the rest of the team. And I would have wanted to highlight them at some point, so that even if the answer doesn't come in the immediate, but she knows which are those questions that should be responded to.
Then, with the addition of David Mania, 3 questions each, up to a maximum of 3 minutes, right? Otherwise, people can ask 3 questions for thousands of hours. So we're all agreeing on the process. Now, having heard us on what we think you should do, you can respond. But it's not for you, you understand, to decide how you should be
I understand.
handled. But now you can respond and say it's unreasonable if you want.
Thank
and
you.
then,
I appreciate that, and I understand the process. The thought I had as I heard these comments was that we had said that I would handle some questions, when I would hand over to my colleague to deal with some of them. And I was wondering if we gave him an opportunity now to consider some of the detail that has been, some of those questions would already have been answered. And the rest of the process for me is fine.
Then, Ms. Son, we plead with you not to speak then, in the generalities you are. Let the colleague of yours who's a lawyer, is he? Let him answer. We want precise answers. Whether it comes from you or some junior manager is neither here nor there. So are we agreeing then that let him quickly reply precisely? And then we're moving towards the David Mania approach. But we are clear that it's within the parameters that, I think he also agrees that we're not going to ask you, did you take money and put it into a bank account in, what's this? Where's this places? You know these places, Mauritius, and where's this? The Cayman Islands, You can't ask those questions, right? But apart from that, yes, we'll ask questions. Now, quickly, can you reply to the precise questions?
I can, Chair, if you, so there's a number of issues, and I hope I get them all. The first is on progress. There's a huge frustration in the room about progress. I think the one bit that has not been highlighted sufficiently is the progress that has been made with financial creditors. And a lot of it is in the presentation. If the current debt is in round figures about 10 billion euros, and that debt has been, a lot of the time that's been spent over the last 6 or 7 months since we've been here last, was to ensure that that debt gets restructured. Because where we were in January, we were in a position that the company was potentially in free fall, and that debt was all payable on demand. So what we as a group has managed to secure over the last 6 or 7 months is we've secured a standstill with our international lenders, which will, if the term sheets are implemented, which we are confident will be done by 20 October of this year, is the group will have a 3-year period within which period no interest will have to be repaid on that debt. It's so-called payment in kind interest. So from a cash flow perspective, dealing with the going concern questions that have been raised, is there will be no interest that will be paid on that debt. At the time that we were here in January, there was 182 international lenders that held debt in this company. That number is significantly reduced. It's now on last count about just over 50 people. The traditional commercial banks have all sold out their debt, and the debt is now owned predominantly by hedge funds. The South African position, which I think is important for this room, at the time when we were here in January, the total debt of Steinhoff on holding company level for South Africa was approximately 2 billion euros, and round figures at the time, 30 billion rand. All of that debt has been repaid. So in January, the debt was 2 billion euros. It is now, bar for some working capital and unitrons, that has all been paid. So no South African bank has got any exposure to Steinhoff. There is debt in Star. Star is a separately listed entity in which we own 71% of the issued share capital. There's approximately 16 billion rands of debt in Star. You would have seen in the presentation on pages 10 and 11, you would have seen what the turnover of Star, it's now called Pepkor, the name changed some 2 weeks ago. It had a turnover in euro figures for the first 6 months of the year, ended at the end of March of this year, of approximately 2.2 billion euros. There was questions about Shoprite. Shoprite does not form part of the Steinhoff Group at all. It's a separately listed company, and Steinhoff has no interest at all within the Shoprite Group. Dealing with Deloitte, Deloitte was appointed as the auditors of the group for 2017 and 2018 audit by the shareholders of the company at the AGM held in Amsterdam on 20 April 2018. We have gone out on tender for the 2019 audit. Deloitte was not invited to take part in that tender. Dealing with some of the European companies is Deloitte, for instance, Steinhoff Europe and Steinhoff Finance. Deloitte, at the time, prior to December 2017, they were not the component auditor of those entities. There were German companies that were auditors of those two separate German listed companies, of those listed separate audit companies. We have, subsequent to December, asked Deloitte to take over the component audits for those entities for the 2017 and the 2018 audits. Dealing with PwC is I and the management team have weekly contact with PwC. In fact, I've got 2 calls a week set up with them. At the current moment, there's more than 100 people of PwC that works on this assignment across the world. The costs for this company in employing PwC is significant. At the moment, it runs north of 200 million rand. The reports that we get from PwC is that they report to the supervisory board on top of that on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. We do get mostly verbal reports for them. There have been 2 written reports. The first written report dealt with a specific matter in Switzerland, which is a commercial transaction that I will bring to the supervisory board in the next week or so for approval to ensure that the trademarks that are the manufacturing trademarks that are owned outside of the group is potentially brought back on balance sheet. And the second report that we received from PwC led to the suspension of Messrs. Legrandsie and Mr. Grobler. Those reports have, upon legal advice, been handed over to the relevant regulators, and the regulators are in possession of that report. Yes, we did.
Not.
Yes, we did. Then, dealing with the names of individuals, it is, as you would have seen from the presentation, there is significant litigation that this group is facing, significant litigation. It is an issue that we as a company have to take very seriously. It is an issue that you will appreciate deals with issues of legal privilege. And it is something that we as a management board have to carefully consider to ensure that part of the PwC process and what we are saying in public is done within the strictures of the judicial processes that are followed. It is, you would have noticed, I think it's page, sorry, just give me a moment. It is page 15 of the presentation. Pleadings have been exchanged in some of those matters, in the extent that answering affidavits have been filed, the pleas have been filed, and other pleas will be filed during the course of next week. Dealing with the 3 shareholder claims, there's 3 that are currently in the process, or in the court processes. The first is the VEB matter in Amsterdam. That was the reason that we couldn't be here last week, because I had to appear in Amsterdam in the VEB matter, where the preliminary motions filed by Steinhoff were argued. And one of those matters that we requested the leave of the judge in Amsterdam was to institute civil proceedings against Mr. Jooste. That matter is currently pending with the judge, and she indicated to us that she would deliver a judgment on the 26th of September of this year. The German group action that I referred to is the shareholder has requested the court in Frankfurt to authorize class action proceedings, and similar type of proceedings were filed. It's been widely publicized in the press by a retail shareholder in South Africa. That matter, the company has not received formal notice of, although I have a courtesy copy of the documentation, and we will deal with that as and when we formally receive that, those legal proceedings. I just want to make sure if the names, the evidence I've dealt with, the nature of the fraud, I think there were some questions about the nature of the fraud, is I think we as a management team, under the supervision of the supervisory board, have tried to break it into 3 sets. Number 1, there is an important part of our mandate to ensure, as Heather said, that financial statements get finalized and published. And the accounting irregularities and the work that PwC is doing in that is very important. This is a massive group. The turnover of this group for the year will still be north of 20 billion euros. It operates in 30 countries, so please appreciate that that is not a small task. It is a new management team, and we are trying to do our best to make sure that this happens as quickly as possible. Secondly, there has been, not just in this room, but from the public at large and from regulators in other jurisdictions, the same questions have been posed to us to say, but who was responsible? That is part of the balancing act that we have at the moment, to ensure on the one hand that you get financial statements out, but you also try and fulfill that mandate. I know there's a frustration with the progress and the speed that has been made, but please appreciate with the available resources, we're moving as quickly as we can, and what has been uncovered to date, the last of it, I probably think not. There might well be, and we have initial indications that there might be further processes against other individuals. And then thirdly is the future of the company. It is paramount that the debt gets stabilized. I think that has to a large extent happened. There are some of the international creditors present in this room today. I think it is important for us also to realize that there has been cash, one of the major things that we tried to set out, Chair, at the beginning was to ensure that the debt resides at the operating companies, because it is important for value to be unlocked in the fullness of time, is that the operating companies survive. If we don't, if we're not in a position where the operating companies can open their doors, there will be no value for stakeholders at the end. So it is, yes, financial statements, yes, individuals are obviously very important issues, but the third issue is probably the most important one, is that we want to be able to sit here in 3 years from now, whatever this company is called, if it's Steinhoff or something else, that it is still alive. And for it still to be alive, we have to ensure that the underlying companies can trade. I hope that has addressed some of the issues more directly.
Can we just, Nati, can we just go with the process you've agreed? You can come back to Steinhoff. Can we just hear Ben Lacrange, please? Right. Mr. Lacrange, you got up to 10 minutes, and then we will ask you questions. Then we'll come back to Ms. Son and the team, and then we'll come back to you after the regulators have finished. Over to you, Mr. Ben Lacrange.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Good afternoon, Chairpersons and Honourable Members. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to address you. I'm not going to take the full 10 minutes because I think you guys want to get into questions. From my side, I'm also deeply saddened with the events that happened at Steinhoff and all the money that was lost, like the majority of people involved in trying to save this business. From my side, I also do not think I did anything deliberately wrong, and I hope that I can shed some light on what went wrong and also how to fix it into the future so that things like this does not repeat itself. And I've given that quite a bit of thought. Wisdom comes in hindsight. So from my side, I was the CFO appointed since 2013 of Steinhoff. So I became the CFO of Steinhoff in 2013. I was mainly responsible from an operational perspective for the business units in Africa, as well as co-responsibility for the business unit in the United States. Steinhoff is a complex group, and I'm pretty sure you have in your previous sessions been taken through the complexity of it. But I did prepare this slide for you in order to just take you through some of the complexities, because to really understand what went wrong, I think it's important to understand the way processes worked and also the way reporting worked and also the way scrutiny worked within this business. Apologies, I did not prepare handouts of these slides. I can make it available to you electronically if you need it. So if you can look on...
Email it as soon as you've finished, then we'll distribute it this morning.
I will do that. So if you look at this slide, on the top of the slide is a block called Steinhoff International Holdings NV, which is the listed entity and the subject of our discussion here today. Then if you move to the left hand of the slide, you'll see there's all the African entities. In the middle, there's a business called Mattress Firm and Sherwood, which is the US entities. And then to the right, there's Steinhoff Finance Holdings and Steinhoff Europe AG, and the Hemisphere Property Division and all the subsidiaries of Steinhoff Europe, which are all the subsidiaries that Steinhoff owns outside of Africa and America. I've also indicated to you on the slide the different layers of reporting that was in the structure in Steinhoff. So if you look at the slide, you'll see that there was multiple levels of reporting where there's multiple levels of boards. Also, at each of these levels, there would be internal audit committees and also external audit involvement. And then, therefore, those numbers are scrutinized at those different operational levels. If you look at the auditors, then each of those units would have what we would call component auditors, which is the auditor external responsible to sign off on the accounts of that unit. That unit would then be reported one level up in order to be tabled on a consolidated level at the following level, until such time as there's a Steinhoff Europe group of companies with a Steinhoff Europe Audit Committee, a Steinhoff Europe Board, and to the same tune to the left of the slide, a Steinhoff Africa group with a Steinhoff Africa Audit Committee and a Steinhoff Africa Board. From my side as the CFO of the listed entity, we would receive audited numbers from Steinhoff Africa, Mattress Firm and Sherwood together as the US cluster, as well as then the consolidated Steinhoff Europe numbers. and those numbers would then already have been scrutinized by the board of those operational entity level as well as the consolidated level, and been reviewed by the external auditors and been the subject of the board discussions and approved by the board. The staff I've got working with me that worked with me in the Johannesburg and Stellenbosch offices would then receive these packs and the financial information that was verified and audited, and would consolidate them in order to get to a position that we disclose to the market in terms of the group's financial results. At no point in time would we as a group on the holding company level re-audit numbers. We relied on the processes and the institutions conducting them, and also the individuals involved in allowing that flow of information to us. The only thing we did do from a holding company's perspective is we did analytical procedures. So what that means is we looked at trends and movements of large balances, and then if something shows to us there might be something incorrect or wrong, we would inquire, and sometimes we would then find an error in a pack or a resubmission of that pack to us. Again, going through that whole audit procedure and process. From my side, I've expressed my willingness to appear in front of the committees already beginning or earlier this year. I'm willing to answer all your questions to the best of my ability, obviously given the extent of actions and investigations applicable, but that's a short introduction just to put things in perspective. I think I just want to add one more thing to this, just to maybe give you some flavor of what went wrong, because it sounds like a very positive story when I talk about levels of reporting and audit committees and internal and external audits. But actually what went wrong, in my mind, we can put into 3 buckets, and I know the detail is much more than this, and I'm pretty sure when the company responds to some more of your questions, they might be able to decide to go into more detail than I would, but just to make it quite simple. So first of all, there were inflated profits. So that we all know, and the company has made that public. Now, the main source of inflated profits resulted from what was called contributions. We were all led to believe at different levels in the company that there's an external buying group. So what the buying group would do is it would take volumes of products that gets purchased by all the different brands, and then someone would negotiate with suppliers in order to give additional rebates to the group. So what transpired is there was a buying group, and this buying group paid contributions or additional rebates to the operating entities, and therefore the company showed that profit coming into its income statement. However, this buying group now seems to look as if it is non-existent, and it was actually funded with loans from Steinhoff. So what that means is Steinhoff made a loan to the buying group. The buying group paid profits to Steinhoff, and therefore there's income in the numbers, and on the balance sheet there's a loan. And that is now, and apologies, I'm trying to keep it simple, otherwise one gets lost in the detail of all of this. It's taking PwC 8 months to get to all these answers, and they've got much more detail than what I would have, but I think that gives you a sense of what happened. These contributions flowed into all parts of the company, also on the Steinhoff Africa part of the company, so it's not just Europe. The bulk of it, however, was in Europe, and the material amounts were in Europe. The reason for my suspension, which I'm sure you're going to get to, so I might just share. The reason for my suspension, I was not given written suspension notice, so I don't have all the detail of the reasoning behind it, and I'm also not privy to the PwC report, so it's difficult to comment on anything, but I was given a reason that the issuance of this invoice from the African group of companies that I implemented and authorized to the buying group was the reason for my suspension. So that's the first bucket of what went wrong. The second bucket of what went wrong related to transactions where assets would be acquired at inflated values. And for there's a lot of permutations. We can maybe, when we get to questions, go into more detail for that one. And then the last issue at hand is there were a number of transactions where, certainly from my side, I thought the parties we are dealing with are valid third parties and it's valid transactions. And now it seems that these parties are in fact related to the previous CEO or related to the company, depending on how you want to view it. Or I should rather not say related to the previous CEO, but I should rather say influenced by the previous CEO. And that is also one of the transactions that Mr. De Pre refers to in terms of the buying back of the trademarks of the manufacturing side of the business. And that's sort of the three buckets. In my mind, one of the things that could have mitigated this, it will not take away all the risk. I think if there's intent to misrepresent and there's a couple of people working together and you can find maybe an auditor that does not do their job properly or assists, then it will be very difficult to really stop that in a corporate environment. But certainly looking at what went wrong in the Steinhoff environment, and one of the learned members pointed it out earlier in a comment, is the fact that we did not have a single set of auditors for the group. I really think that's where things got very difficult. Maybe to point out to you when I spoke earlier about the inflated values, you would have seen from the interim results that the company announced that another item that was inflated was cash and cash equivalents. Now, if you look at that structure over there, if you look to the right to Steinhoff Europe would have its auditor, and that auditor would sign off its balance sheet. It had on its balance sheet loans receivable that were backed by warranties, and therefore that auditor showed that loan receivable as cash equivalent. But that warranty was in fact not given by a third-party bank. That warranty was given by the top holding company, Steinhoff International. So from that auditor's perspective, they would view it on that level as cash equivalents. But what should have happened is once it gets to the top level where we would have consolidated the numbers, if it was a single set of auditors, and it does not necessarily have to be Deloitte, but let's pick one of the larger ones, they would have known that that warranty was given by the top company, and therefore on consolidation, it should be removed and reversed because it's not valid from a group perspective and therefore it's not cash equivalents. Now that's just one example where having had a single set of auditors, in my view, would have certainly decreased the risk of what happened at Steinhoff. Thank you, Honourable Chair.
Now we had Nati, David, preferably people who haven't spoken yet, Thandi, if you don't mind. Okay. Mkoleko. Okay. Yes, my friend, you from Freedom Front, yeah. Your name I've forgotten, I apologize. Anton, eh? Yeah, we spoke, I remember. Thandi, Mr. The two DA members, in whatever order. Maybe Mr. Lees first this time. Who knows? Okay. Over to... and can I please make one point, Nati, before you speak? The minister used to be an ordinary member of parliament a long, long time ago. And she knows the decorum in the committee. Yeah. Now, the thing is that she's disturbing Thandi, right? No, hang on. And I feel that, Minister, to disturb Thandi when she disturbs everybody else is both a good thing and a bad thing. But I'll leave it to you. Right, over then to Nati.
No, thank you very much, Honourable Chair, Honourable Members. I think for me, the input by Mr. Legranje, brief as it is, I think it's the crux of the matter. That's the most important part. Now, the problem I had with the earlier input, I'll tell you what it was. It sounded like a board report back meeting, right? And did not zoom into the specific matters. For instance, I'm certain that I can speak for almost every public representative here. We have absolutely no business whether Steinhoff exists or doesn't exist, whether it makes profit or doesn't make profit. I'm making an example. However, we have an interest around two critical issues, and that is what happened and what are the institutional governance issues, corporate governance issues that can also be derived as lessons, for ourselves. And I think related to that is whether or not are there any shortcomings, loopholes, and whatsoever with regards to a regulatory framework. And that's why, for me, listening to regulatory bodies will also be important, but it would have made much more sense to listen to them in reference to what has clearly been identified as corporate governance kind of weaknesses and whatever and so on. Now, my suggestion, I don't know whether we can still somewhat rescue this particular exercise in one form or the other, is that there has got to be quite a serious effort that is put into the whole question of unpacking the what happened part. Yeah? And in that, clearly identify the corporate governance issues and regulatory issues and so forth. And that we be exposed to that as members of parliament, for an example, and begin to unpack, decipher, and whatever we will want to do with that and so forth, so that we can then effectively guide the process, amongst other things. And I think there is the second question. The second question is, what happened to pension funds? What happened to investments? Sitting on the outside as an ordinary person, for instance, that's a key question. Public servants, I'm not sure what the number is now, but at some point, and I would hope it still is the case, at some point they were estimated to be about 1.1 million. So if you're talking about a pension fund that affects public servants of that number, for an example, so it's quite a serious chunk that you are talking about and so on. So that's besides the whole question of investments and stuff like that. So I think, for me, that question is also quite important to be clarified. So what happened to the risk factors? The risk factors is a question of your investments as well as your pensions. So I just wanted to throw that one in the Honorable Chair. Thanks very much.
We're going to allow the speakers who haven't spoken latitude, right? And then after they speak the first time, everybody who speaks the second time or more will ask 3 questions, as we agreed, up to 3 minutes. Secondly, some of the questions overlap with Steinhoff, and not just Mr. Ben Lacranje, so you will also answer them, but Mr. Ben Lacranje, you're free to answer. Right. David?
No, thanks, Comrade Chair, and to other honorable members. Firstly, is to commend the 3 of you there. Comrade Chair, someone is misbehaving there. No, thanks, Chair. I wanted to say, firstly, we must commend this Parliament and yourselves in particular. Very important. You are the Parliament for the Republic of South Africa. Whether we are involved in private entity or public entities, we must be bothered what happens into our country, because it has huge implication. Therefore, the appearance by Steinhoff, it's unprecedented but fundamental, very important. One of the things that is coming up, and thanks for the presentation by Mr. Lacranje, we're having a bigger scandal equivalent to the Enrons that happened. Because there must be an appreciation, Chair, that this had big impact. Sometimes you will never be able to put the figures. This team should understand that this thing had a reputational damage to our country in terms of our country's assets. They've never done the calculation in terms of the country's assets, including the industry itself. And remember, the rent took a dive. And a number of other people that invested here, that actually a number of challenges we faced. We are very lucky now that to a certain extent, Mr. Lacranje is saying what happened. And you could see that this was organized corruption of the highest order by private sector, like it happened with other entities in the world. I made the example of Enron. And by sheer luck, that the auditors, they refused to sign, they got caught. Because if they were not caught, and the explanation itself of the inflation of either the assets all the reporting in terms of the liquidity. It's just a pyramid scheme that has been used. And you could see it's a well-structured pyramid scheme. And at the center of the problems, you think you have ethical business people that have been succeeding over many years. But the reality is that, Comrade Chair, even the ethical business people are corruptible. This is corruption. And then let me come to the point, Comrade Chair.
Yeah.
The issue of the assurance, because Mr. Lekranji speaks about that he is sitting at the holding company level. What were the balance and checks that you did put? Because if you are having a number of sets of auditors, there should be an assurance levels that you have to deal with. And you can't only rely on the question of the external auditors that had to give it to the board after the review. They should have been the internal system. What actually happens for a company that had so much of assets? And then lastly, Chair, the issues of private sector failures and potential failures from a regulatory point of view, why has this company, because of his huge impact, probably when the regulators come, to arrest the situation and stabilize and consider liquidation? Why this one is so unique? Because this is a very serious matter when you actually do regulation of this magnitude.
No, a very brief one. There's something that disturbed me, and I forgot to ask about this thing. How are you on suspension without any written notification? I mean, how possible is that? I mean, I just, either Mr. Lekranji or the board chair and deputy can clarify that thing, because I've never heard of something like that.
That also struck me. That's a Satawu former general secretary. Former, I must say. Who's next? Okay, whoever is next, right? Who's the next? Yeah, we decided that Mkoleko, because he has... Andy, don't worry. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. I'm interested, Ms. Lekranji, if you could just take us through the nature and circumstances of the auditing. I would like you to expand on that, because for me it stands out as a red flag. Because I think what we are interested here, as the Chair of Scopol always says, what killed the patient? And so we're doing a post-mortem. So I think for me that audit function is very, very important. And in the manner in which it has been described, it causes great unease, does not sit well with me. So if you can just take us through the auditing structure internally and externally, and then what happened to the reports, particularly of internal audit and internal controls, because I would imagine escalation to boards and so on would warrant certain levels of responses, and whether any of the findings found themselves subjected to a response plan to say, right, here are the findings and this is how we're going to respond to them. So that's the first instance. I would just like a far more detailed narration of what was the nature of auditing. I know you glossed over it, but I would like it in more detail. Secondly, Chair, to emphasize what has been asked by the Honorable Ntlego, the nature and circumstances of this suspension. I think it's quite telling, and I think once explained, it will put a lot of things into perspective, because I'll just be interested in the due process that was followed, and whether it is consistent with the law, or is it consistent with ad hoc practices which are being effected now, because we can't deal with this ad hocly. It needs to form part and parcel of something which makes sense, and what makes sense is the law, and not a knee-jerk reaction which in the main seeks to appease us on this side to say action has been taken. We can't bask in the glory of illegal action, even if it seeks to achieve an outcome which is favorable. Thanks, Chair.
That is particularly, but I think Thandi was next, right? And the two DA colleagues.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I want Yeah, Chair, I want to say to General Khan, I'm not very smart, but, yeah, I'm not very smart. But I suspect this gentleman is a fallback of the company. General Khan, I'm saying I suspect Mr. Lechranzi is a fallback of Steinhoff. But one day I'll explain myself why I suspect that. But I'm not smart. It takes.
Are you saying fall guy?
Yeah, he's a fall guy. He's put under the bus. But one day I'll explain myself. I'm not so quick to think. I'll think, and then when I start to think, I'll explain myself. Yeah, I'm not very smart, so I take the time to think. Mr. Lechranji, you were dealing with analytical procedures. And part of the analytical procedures, I want to know whether the tools that you used also looked at share values. Was it part of the work of the Africa component to do that? And I'm going to make a U-turn because the reason why I'm asking this, you cracked the gist by explaining how profit margins are determined and how rebates were used and loans provided. So General Khan, that's how I come to this thing, you see. There's rebates, there's loans provided, and this influences profit margins. And here's an Africa component, you see. So, to me, it cracks the gist. But because I'm not smart, I can't come to that conclusion. And it comes to the question as to why will a person who deals with analytical procedures only and not re-audit numbers gets to be suspended? Why a person who only deals with analytical procedures and not re-audit numbers? Because the issue is in the profit margins and the numbers that were reported. So here's a person, he only used analytical procedures to, that's why I asked, are you also determining share values? Now, once you answer that question, it will make me smarter, Chair. The rest, I will deal with them later when we re-ask questions, because I will come to a question where I'm going to deal with trademarks.
Thandi, look, you've repeatedly said that you're slow and you can't think and all. Now, the entire committee has agreed to that, right? We moved a motion in that regard and seconded it. There's no need for you to... Is there anybody who disagrees with Thandi that she's very slow and can't think? Yeah, okay, good. The only problem, once you agree with that, is that's why she says she takes so long. When everybody else takes 3 minutes, she takes 30 minutes, Comrade Lodlo. So that's the argument. You can't have it both ways. If she's slow, Thandi's got special dispensation to speak for up to 30 minutes, Nati. Right, okay. But you don't, because you people claim you're bright. 3 minutes. Or 3 questions.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you could tell us whether, looking back, you believe that Marcus Jooste ever lied to you, misled you, or used you during your term as the CFO of Steinhoff? That's my first question. You did make reference to a person leading you to believe certain things about companies in the group. Did Marcus Jooste, in your view, ever lie to you, mislead you, or do you think use you? That's the first question. The second question is, when, given the fact that there were red lights flashing in the system since at least 2015, when did you first become aware of the fraud in the Steinhoff group? And when you became aware of it, what did you do about it? That's the second question. The third question is, you chose your words very carefully and said that in your view, You never did anything deliberately wrong. That means that you, in my view, that you concede that in fact you did some things wrong. Looking back, what in your view did you do wrong? Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Khonje, I see that you did your articles with PwC, and then you worked for PwC after your articles as well. And now PwC is doing this investigation. So what is your relationship with PwC as a result of your long association with them? And then David's asked you a question about Marcus Jooster's relationship with you. What exactly is your relationship, or was your relationship with Marcus Jooster beyond the business parameters? I mean, given your background with PwC and your position, very senior position as the CFO, surely you weren't simply a bookkeeper consolidating financial statements for the group. Surely you had a responsibility to do some due diligence about the reports coming in from the subsidiary companies. You were, after all, the CFO. You were not the bookkeeper. And your position as CFO was the one on which investors in this group probably relied more than anything else. And yet you come here today and you imply that you were simply sitting in Johannesburg or Stellenbosch consolidating financial statements, and that was the extent of your responsibility. I find that very, very difficult to accept. When you say that these three areas of misstatement, malfeasance, whatever you like to call it, occurred, are you saying to us that you only became aware of these once PwC were called in to do a full investigation? Or were you aware of some of this, at least, or an indication of this, prior to the expose in December 2017? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And then it's Mr. Shivambu then. Okay, there's nobody else that came.
No, thanks, Chair.
Chair, the agreement was that questions would be put and then they'd be immediately answered.
That was to Steinhoff, I thought. Mr. Ben Lagrange has been very precise. Whether we agree or disagree with him, frankly, it's the best input we got in terms of clarity that we've had since January. I thought it'll come in with Steinhoff because they were sort of waffling. Shall we just finish this process? Okay, Mr. Shivambu, then Anton, is it? Anton, yes, my friend. Sorry about that.
No, thanks, Chair. I wanted directed questions that should be responded to. So, does the former CEO think that one of the major shareholders, Christo Vizi, was aware of the wrongdoing far much earlier than the time he cited when he came here to Parliament? And does he think that the chair of the audit committee, Steve Boysen, was aware far much earlier or even complicit in the wrongdoing that led to the collapse of the company? And I'm raising this because these are people who are still playing significant role in South Africa's economy. and in very important institutions. So they are of course processes that we have to engage in terms of the consequences, because you cannot just be a talk show that speaks about things and there's no consequences whenever there's wrongdoing. So let us then establish that from the person who was inside. And what do you think was the real reason for your verbal suspension or unprocedural suspensions? What do you think were the circumstances that led to that from the company? Those are the directed questions that we need a response to. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you for remembering me. Mr. Legrandsie, thank you for your presentation. Would like to ask you a question, but also the other directors. You've outlined some blind spot or a big blind spot to us. I'd like to ask you if there were any other blind spots that you did not allude to today in the operations of the company. And given the Companies Act and the Financial Markets Act and any other legislative frameworks that you must be cognizant of, do you have any advice, so looking at this from a corrective measure, on how those pieces of legislation must be amended to make sure this doesn't ever happen again? And then thirdly, just to give us an insight from your point of view, given the fact that this company is a multinational company, and that an institutional failure of this company would contaminate systems all across the world or affect systems across the world, how we can actually, from a South African point of view, liaise with regulators internationally to make sure that multinational companies cannot fail in a spectacular manner like this. We might have other companies much larger than you in the future, a company like Apple or Google or whatever the case may be with huge caps, that could fail if we do not take corrective measures now and amend legislation within South Africa, but also internationally in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, comrade. Well, Mr. Legrandsie, I was actually pleased and surprised by your input because it was straight and pointed, and I was wondering, I mean, the way you've just put it, do you in your own mind think that Steinhoff somehow needed PwC to be able to have that kind of global understanding of what the problems might be? Because up to now, we have not had anything closer to what you have said from Steinhoff 3 sessions later, which makes one wish that maybe if we had had you in January and not even have had Steinhoff, it would have saved us a lot of time and some bit of focus. But I also don't understand, now that you're sitting there, do you think it was necessary for you to be subpoenaed to come and share this information with us?
Thank you, Chairperson, and greetings to everyone here who we do hope you will all be assisting us so that we're able to ensure our institutions, the financial ones especially, are more robust. It is in line with my colleague here, co-chairs, who referred to your long period of association with PwC. And also, as you put it, your integrity at the time that you worked in Steinhoff. You also told us that you headed up the Africa operation as well as co-chaired, it sounded like, or co-helped the operation in the United States. Now, given that situation, and given your background in the financial architecture of governance, because that is essentially what auditors are seized with, financial good governance, when did you yourself become aware that there was a strange smell in Steinhoff? And the reason I say this is because you pointed out in your own operations, you were taken by surprise, if not shock, when you were, what is it, suspended without it being put in writing. It would seem then that your own knowledge and background would have immediately enabled you to share some of the challenges that had arisen at that point. And so I do question some of the veracity in what you have said, although like our chairperson here, Comrade, the Honourable Karim, he has made it clear we do appreciate the detail, but even in the detail, there are very serious omissions. So I'm unable to link the dots, you see, Chairperson, in this. And the same thing as when PwC were finally called in, I may be wrong, it looks like December 2017. If indeed that is the case, and you yourself and others in finance were aware something's not right, why on earth were you still dealing with Deloitte? I believe they're there until the end of December. Now, Urba may be able to tell me why you have to keep on an auditing company which you know lacks integrity. I would like to know from Urba what clause forces you into such an unequal and unfair arrangement. Thank you.
Just very quickly, firstly, you described a very complex, intricate structure, right? But what's so special about that? Because all international companies, in some form or another, have such intricacies, but they're not corrupt. So what happened here? Secondly, I think the committee would like, you see, I don't personally believe that because a person may or may not be, or is suspected to have committed irregularities, that we shouldn't ask that person, hey, now that it's all happened, what do you think were the real causes? You know, let's say now, for example, somebody's prosecuted for 10 years. And you go into the prison and ask them, hey, now you're here for 10 years, it's all over, the appropriate authorities have done so, not Parliament, found you guilty. Now we want to ask you, man, based on what's happened in your experience, you're here for 10 years now, can you tell us what really went wrong? You're serving your sentence. You can tell us what, and what do you think were the lacuna and the regulation that allowed you to get away? And what do you think we can do about it, right? There's no harm in there. Now, I'm not implying you are personally, it's not my job. It's for the prosecuting and other authority. So I'm not saying you're personally guilty. I don't have any evidence personally. But what I'm saying is I would like, and I think we would like, more about the causes and what can be seen to be the lacuna in the regulation or practices and what can be done to deter that from happening. Personally, and I think many others will agree, it's inherent in the free market system, some would argue. It's, you know, if you really want to stop Steinhoffs, some of us believe you need a fundamentally different social system. But we are where we are, and we can do more to deter these things happening. So I don't think you can answer those questions necessarily now. What we are asking is maybe the members will agree that within a week or two you write to us and tell us more in a way that's consistent with your right to any fair hearing in any regulatory or investigative process. Next thing is, on the suspension, I think others have raised this. It is actually curious, to put it mildly. And Steinhoff must answer for that. Thandi suggests that maybe it's a fall guy they're looking for. Well, maybe it's true. I don't know. All I know is that the experiences both in the public and private sector corruption is that people look for a fall guy. And I'm not saying you are the fall guy. I don't know. Other people are deeply questioning how you could not know. And that's also a question I want to ask at the same time. Then on the issue of Steinhoff, this committee up till now, though there's no reason why we should stick by, as we begin to understand more, we may change our views. Until now, our view is we're not interested in the, if I'm correct, our view has been, we're not interested in Steinhoff as a private sector company. The markets must decide whether you exist or you don't exist. What we are concerned, though, is about jobs and about pensions being rescued, not just the public sector employees, but elsewhere. So until now, our view has been that Steinhoff should, as far as possible, be rescued. Not because we like you, right? It's because we feel that the implications of what you're doing for the working class of this country, not just the public sector workers, and for the financial stability, and for investment and other reasons, it may be a case that we've been arguing until now, you should be rescued. Not because we care about you, quite frankly, and we're not talking about you as a company. Our concern is the workers. Our concern is the pensions. Our concern is the impact you're having, everybody's saying. So that has been our view, and I think it should be our view, that we don't want Steinhoff to go down. If you're a private company with no implications for anybody, especially lower income people and workers, we'd say, who cares? The markets must decide, right? Now, the other stunning thing, it's a stunning thing actually, which I think everybody is saying in different ways, and Steinhoff must answer for this. How is it possible that in a mere 10 minutes, Mr. Ben Lechrantje has given us more insights, answered more precisely, and he's very vulnerable, right, with other possible actions outside the parliamentary system. How can he do that in a mere 10 minutes? And you've been wriggling here. We understood the first time. It's now the third time. We got more out of him in the 10 minutes. If in 10 minutes, Mr. Lechrantje, you know, finally, you know what, Mr. Lechrantje, like others, while I value what you said, and it's giving a lot of us insights in what we can and couldn't do in terms of regulations and oversight, it is hard to believe that the way you're presenting it, that you were almost oblivious to what was happening. So I'm not saying that you personally have done anything wrong, but let's take, for example, I'm a board chair, right? And operational issues mean some senior manager is corrupt. Morally, I must step down. Although I did nothing, I took no money, I'm not even getting a salary. Morally, I have to step down as the board chair, right? Though I did nothing wrong. And I'm getting no money out of it, I'm using my spare time. So morally, surely, let me put it in a more a senior manager who played the role you play, even if you're not personally complicit, you've done no wrong, morally, you are complicit. Would you agree with that as a general statement of people in your situation, not about you specifically, because I don't want to ask that question. I don't think it's appropriate for me to ask. It's for some authority that's appropriate to ask. Morally, you are complicit, surely, like I would be as a board chair in the circumstances I just set out. Do you agree or not? Forgot.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I'm going to go through the questions as it was asked to me. Obviously, if I missed anything, then I do apologise, and you must just please tell me so I can answer it. So first of all, touching on my suspension without written notice. So what has happened actually is in January this year, we realised that the company will not gain credibility with third-party lenders if I remain the CFO of the company. So I stepped down as CFO in January this year. I did not want to walk away, and I did want to offer my assistance and relationships within the wider group to the new management team in order to assist them to get through this process of an immediate need for liquidity, as well as then the PwC investigation and also some other projects like the restructuring of the automotive group, and also assisting them with historical corporate memory and information regarding certain litigations they face. I then concluded a fixed term agreement with the company, committing myself till end of December in order to go to the office every day and assist them with these processes or whatever they need where I can be of assistance. I think Mr. De Pre described it quite well, and Ms. Son as well, in terms of the pressure points having been the third-party funders actually, and that takes a hell of a lot of time. It sounds very simple to do, but it is really something where one morning you think you've got something, and then the same morning, a couple of hours later, it feels like the place is burning and someone wants to pull the plug. So that took them 24 hours a day to really attend to these matters, to get the lock-up agreement agreed with all the party lenders. Once that has happened, I had on my desk 1 or 2 projects still left, and then I approached Mr. De Pre and I actually gave them notice to tell them, listen, I'm going to give you my 3-month notice period as per my fixed-term employment agreement, and they accepted that notice period. So I would have in any case left the company end of September, just because I think my usefulness to assist them was served, and I couldn't add that much more value. And then I was actually suspended within my notice period. I think the company just, and they must answer for themselves, just haven't had time yet to put it in writing to me. That's the way I view it, at least. Then there was a question on what happened to the pension funds. So I mean, I'm not 100% sure I understand the detail of the question, but the difficulties, and that's what makes this event such a sad event in our history, is that the pension funds have lost money up to where the share price is today. The company needs to focus on a restructure, and then the debt is still there. And the honourable member mentioned it earlier that there's a huge amount of debt that's still there. And that debt will, in all likelihood, and this is my view personally and not that of the companies, would have to involve a subsequent restructure again, because the debt needs to be repaid in some sort of way. So in my mind, I do believe that the losses that the pension funds took up to date will, in all likelihood, be permanent losses and not necessarily temporary losses. Certainly, in my mind, I cannot see that the share price would go back to the levels it were before what happened in December. And you can see that from the numbers that Steinhoff released. If you look at that in detail and analyze that, then you can see that those levels of prices is not possible. Then on the question of assurances and internal systems, I think it's important to note that each of the boards I refer to, and I'm really not trying to sound as if I abstain my responsibility and give it over to boards below me. It's a matter of detection and being able to see something is wrong or not. Now, I place reliance on boards approving numbers. So the way it will work is 4 times a year there will be a board getting together on a subsidiary level. Again, if you take that slide that I've got there, take the French business called Conforama Group. They would get together. At that board meeting, there would be local management. There would be non-executives from the shareholder level as well. And those people would sit and they would go through the numbers and scrutinize it at that level. And at that level, they would ask management questions on the numbers, asking them, what's this, what happened here, what was the impact of a weak sales period, etc., etc. Once that board meeting is finished, there's the minutes of the meeting, as well as then that board would enter into an audit committee session where at the audit committee the numbers will be approved and recommended to the board for their stamp. And once all of that is done, it flows up in the chain. What I meant with analytical procedures is certainly not that I'm sitting at the head office, and apologies maybe for making it sound like that, and I do the bookkeeping. I don't even know how to do the computer program that runs the books. I've got a team of people who would do that for me, and then they would present me with the detailed information, whereby we would run ratios, so it's ratio analysis, to look at covenants, to look at debt equity ratios, to look at margins, to look at margin evolvement. So just to make sure and double check if a business unit did submit a margin of a 7% EBIT margin, that it's now not suddenly 10% or 4%. If that is the case, then we would go back to the division of Conforama and tell them, listen, you've now submitted this pack, but historically your margin is always between 7 and 8%, now it's 9%, what's going on? And then we would engage in further discussions. But it's not a matter of a re-audit. So that's what I meant with the analytical procedure. So it is actually detailed work, but it's not re-auditing numbers and going, for example, to the Steinhoff Europe entity, telling them you are showing now a balance here, I want to see the contract itself, because I relied on auditors asking the question, where's the contract, is it there, is there an invoice for that flow? In addition to the assurances, I think it's also important to note that there was an internal audit function. The internal audit function was either conducted by people within the Steinhoff group, so therefore in-house internal audit, and then there's also, I almost said outsourced internal audit. In some of these places on the slide that I made for you, and remember again to Mr. De Pree's point from earlier, this is now a very simplistic look at the group. It is way more complicated. If you look at the group structure in totality, there's hundreds and hundreds of companies involved. And that is also what is making the process of getting through the audit and getting individual entities signed off so extremely challenging and time consuming. But if you look at these components that I've summarized for you here, there would also be internal audit involved in each one of them, either by in-house teams or by people externally engaged. Those internal auditors would look at internal controls and the normal stuff that internal audit would look, and those reports would get tabled in front of the Steinhoff International Holdings NV Internal Audit Committee, not internal, external audit committee, and once a year there would be a meeting on control reports where each one of these countries' reports is scrutinized by that committee and worked through. I think what also happened here is that the internal auditor that was appointed to look at the Steinhoff Europe segment was again a small firm of internal auditors. It wasn't an in-house function or a Deloitte or KPMG or PwC function. Then maybe getting further into the audit structure, the internal and external audit. So if you look at that slide, there would be component auditors, as I mentioned earlier. They would do the external audit for the individual businesses at the bottom. And then there would also be the main auditors being Deloitte. But remember that Deloitte was also the component auditor for some of these divisions. So for example, if you now take the automotive business in Steinhoff Africa, Deloitte would be the auditor for that business as a component auditor, and then that information would flow to Steinhoff International at the NB consolidated there, and Deloitte would sign off on the Steinhoff International accounts. What had happened in Steinhoff Europe AG, where the most material amounts of what PwC is looking at, to my knowledge, is actually vested, is there was a small audit firm looking at that business unit called Commercial Treuhand, CT, which is a small German firm that Mr. De Pree referred to. And they did the audit there and then submitted that audit back up a level. Deloitte then reviewed, because they were not Deloitte itself that submitted the component audit, but it's a placing reliance from Deloitte on the work of another auditor. They had to review the working files of CT and also had to review the working papers to the extent that they deemed it necessary of CT, and also do a test on the credentials and credibility of CT. So those control reports that I talk about, they would be tabled at the Steinhoff International Holdings Audit Committee, of which Mr. Steve Boyson is the chairperson, and that audit committee would scrutinize all of them and then give action lists through to management to attend or rectify or correct. So for example, if in Australia there was an issue where one area would have excessive stock theft, then it would be tabled at that meeting through the internal audit report from Australia, and in all likelihood the supervisory board would ask us what the amounts are. If it is material, what have we done to rectify it, or is it a people issue, have you replaced the people? So it's a very operational control report that gets discussed there and tabled like in other corporates. There was a question on if my suspension is legal or not. I think I've explained it earlier. It's not a matter of being in dispute with Steinhoff on the suspension. My nature of my assistance there was in any case one that was only going to be till December, and I shortened it from my side till September, and the company then suspended it within my notice period. On the analytical procedures, Honourable Member, I'm not sure if I've answered you enough on that. You did ask specifically if we... and you asked specifically about share values.
Is what a member saying? There's some rumblings.
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we, as a matter of fact, call this a suspension? I'm just worried about that phrasing. I think it just needs to be looked at again, because if it's put as suspension and under the circumstances which it has been described, raises whole other questions. And yeah.
Nati, very quickly.
No, very quickly. It's not a suspension. In fact, it's the. They might have opted for, the first chapter in the Labour Relations Act, for an example, to therefore terminate the contract of employment. I think essentially that's what it is. So it's something that may have got to be clarified, but certainly along the
Come back to that.
But not suspension.
Yeah. That's the former DG of the Labour Department. Okay. To let everybody know in what capacity you are speaking. Different people. Yeah.
No, comrade.
Over to you, Mr. Ben Lagrange. Can we just finish now, because we're running out of time? Precise answers. Have you got more answers, please? There are a lot of questions asked that you haven't answered. Quickly, yeah?
Yes, Honourable Chair. Yeah, just on the share value question. So when we did the analytical procedures, we would not look at share value. So what we did is we would look at balance sheet ratios, capability to repay debt, and not necessarily look at the share price itself, because that is not something we determine, that's something the market determines. I was asking back, looking back, if Marcus Jooste lied or used or misled me. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to venture onto dangerous terrain, but I do believe that there was a limited sharing of information from Mr. Jooste to myself. I didn't deliberately use the word deliberately wrong. I don't believe I did anything wrong. I became aware of the fraud over the weekend of 2 December 2017, when I was called in the Sunday evening by the Audit Committee. At that meeting, I was for the first time given a Deloitte report. And for the first time, the Audit Committee asked me to comment on the Deloitte report. I was shocked at what was in the report, and I then told him, listen, I can't have a comment. We need to wait for the CEO, who was then on a plane, to arrive back in South Africa, because he must comment on the bulk of the items in the report. He then landed the Monday morning after that weekend, and he never showed up for the Audit Committee, and then I knew something's wrong. I've got a relationship with all the audit firms in the country. The fact that I did my articles at PwC, I don't even know the people there from my article days anymore, so there's really no concern from anyone's side in terms of my relationship with the PwC. My relationship with Marcus Jooste was only a relationship of being business colleagues, so we were not friends or socialized outside of a business environment. I have answered the bookkeeping part. Yeah, on the 3 buckets, again, apologies if I'm making it too simple. The information the company has to deal with is way more complex than just putting it in 3 buckets. But I thought, for the purposes of my discussion with the committees, it just goes easier if we can identify and talk through it. But on the 3 buckets, on the question if I only became aware of it when PwC issued their view, these buckets were in fact raised by Deloitte and not by PwC. PwC is currently in a process where they took the Deloitte information and they have gone wider than the Deloitte report in terms of scope, because they've got unlimited scope, but they are getting proof for the stuff in the Deloitte report that Deloitte flagged to the board and that I was shared with me that weekend of 2 December. I personally do not think that, I do think the company needs PwC. It is a huge task to go through all the information, And I think the company, and specifically the chairperson of the company, is on a drive to get anyone that was involved or responsible to put their case on record, and then from there to take it further. And to do that, you need proof. So it's not something the company has got resources or even skills to do themselves. To my knowledge, I really do not think Christa Wiese was aware of any wrongdoing. And I also do not think Steve Boyson was aware of any wrongdoing. We've spoken enough about the suspension. Yeah, on the other blind spots and advising on how legislation can be amended in order to fix it, and in the multinational and cross-border situation, I think all three of those questions I'm going to put into one answer, since we are pressed for time. If you think through it, I've already mentioned earlier that I do think there needs to be some thought put into the principle of why would a multinational large group be allowed to use small audit firms to audit components or even holding companies within those structures. So in hindsight, if I look back now, that is one of the ways in which this was not picked up for several years, even before my appointed as CFO in 2013. So I do think that needs to be addressed in a way, but it must be a responsible way where it's not affecting small audit firms again, because that's the counter to it. But I do think one needs a more sensible approach, maybe forcing multinationals to say, even per country, you must have one set of auditors. And you can't have different ones in Germany and different ones in other countries. Then on systems across the world, I think one other thing that the JSE also mentioned in some of their press that I read that must be addressed is how do you regulate dual-listed entities? So currently the way the JSE works is they're regulated in terms of the Frankfurt rules, because the primary listing is in Frankfurt and the secondary one is in Johannesburg. So that might be something to consider on how to work, rather to have dual-listed companies also comply with the JSE regulations, which regulations, in fact, is on a world standard if you compare it to the one I know now being Frankfurt. I think in terms of getting all systems across the world to talk to each other, and the Honourable Chairperson also mentioned it earlier, I don't think you can really prevent the risk or take it away completely of someone being out there trying to manipulate the numbers. If someone wants to do it and they've got the means or the system to hide it, they will be able to do it in some sort of way. So I don't think you can completely take away that risk, but I do think there are ways to mitigate and decrease it. Personally, I think the Companies Act is still something that corporates are grappling with, and even the legal profession. So I'm not suggesting the answer will lie in the Company Act, but I do believe a single set of auditors could have prevented what we saw here at Steinhoff. On the subpoena that was issued, I'm not going to make it a long story, but I do want to comment on it. I'm very glad that the chairperson did ask the question. I was from the start willing to appear in front of these committees, and I had the date of the 22nd of August in my diary, and that date was agreed with my attorney. The date was then amended to today's date, but only with contact with the company and not with myself. And we then told Parliament that we won't be able to attend today, and can they give us another date? Not changing my intention to appear in front of the committee, just finding a suitable date for my attorney. Fortunately, in appearing now, I was able to get the advocate to change his diary to attend with me. And my attorney can't be here, so I've answered the PwC Association. On the help with Africa and the USA, it's important that help is quite intensive. So it is really looking after the asset, making decisions on capital. It's not just hanging around in the office waiting for one of these divisions to give you a phone call. So it was a really operational involvement in all the business units in Africa, as well as the USA. So apologies if that didn't come out properly earlier. Then someone mentioned that I was surprised or shocked when I was suspended. That was not my words that I used. And then there was a question, when did I become aware of the smell? Again, to my point of earlier, there were lots of press last year. In 2015, press started negative press about Steinhoff. The 2015 matter resolved around the German tax information that was raided from the offices. At that point in time, I was shocked that it happened to Steinhoff, but we then immediately appointed through the, at that point in time, it was still the independent directors of the board because it was a South African entity then, appointed specialists in Germany to assist us in evaluating the merits of these tax matters that was raised by the German authorities. And those merits were reported back to the board on a very, very regular basis. I also got a lot of comfort from my verbal engagement with the CEO on these matters. So that really didn't raise the red flag for me. And I also got comfort by the fact that even though the CEO was also being investigated in the German matters, that the reporting of these specialists' opinions is not going via the CEO, but went actually via the board itself. So that gave me the additional comfort that I can rely on those reports. Subsequent to that, in 2017 specifically, we received a lot of negative press. You would have recalled things like Bloomberg reports, like the Viceroy report, although that hit the scene only after the events of the 6th of December. But there were lots of negative press on certain structures and transactions. I really believe that there was misinformation planted by our JV partner with whom we had a huge legal battle on in 2 countries for large amounts. And we answered through our investor relations team and with the assistance of the CFO in Europe and the CEO of the group answered all these press queries to the extent where I felt it was plausible and I could believe the answers that were given. I was really taken by surprise when I received the Deloitte report on the 2nd of December, setting out specific transactions resulting in the inflation of income and the inflated balance sheets. There was a question asked why Deloitte is still here. I'm going to leave that to the company maybe to answer, if it's okay, Mr. Chair. Honourable Chair, I take note of the writ to the members and I will do that and then send it through. Then there was a question on that it seems that I was oblivious to what was happening and also that I had to step down morally of people in my situation, not referring to me specifically. What I did do in January is I did step down as the CFO of Steinhoff due to the moral implication, and the moral implication did not resonate around guilt or not being guilty, etc., but it was much more of giving the new team the possibility to speak to creditors. People who were so angry at Steinhoff, for them to see my face, they wanted to hit it. So just to give them the chance to have that credibility, I therefore stepped down from that position. I hope that addresses the bulk of the questions.
Okay, and you will, within 2 weeks or so, insofar as you can, give us more of a sense of the causes along the concrete lines you've done, the lacuna in the legislation in your view, what can be done to address it. Now, there are follow-up questions. Yeah, there's a proposal that the 3 chairs would like to offer. We're at 13:00 or just past that. In fact, it's 13:15 almost. So we got 15 more minutes because the people out there, the service workers, they have their own agenda. So we must close at 13:30. So what I'm suggesting is that we hand over to Steinhoff now, or we are suggesting, if I'm correct, and it was to respond to the questions that have arisen in this round to Mr. Ben, like why did you dispense with his services in the way you did, etc. Why is there such a big gap between the way you answer and he answers, and so on. And then what we do is see how many minutes we got left, and then we move to this question-answer thing now. Sure. Up to 3 questions answer, up till 13:30. And then I would like, well, we, Vilma, if you disagree, just press the button and speak, right? What we are 3 suggesting is that we can stay till maybe, well, the last bus goes at 20:00 today, not a problem. And if need be, we can call people back. But what we would like is to get insights from the regulators. What are they up to? Mm-hmm. And then come back to Steinhoff and Mr. Ben Lagrange with the question-answer thing. You ask 3 questions, they answer. Questions, answer. But what do people feel now? Who disagrees and why? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mr. Mania.
Chair, my view is that questions have been put, some questions have been replied to, some haven't, but to the extent that there are follow-up questions, they should be put to Steinhoff and to Mr. Ben Lecranchi now, and we should get our answers no matter how long it takes. Once we have our answers, I think we should then move to the regulators.
Like, even if we go that course, we should still ask questions at the end, because there may be things we pick up from the regulators. For example, Hawks might say, we haven't met Ms. Son. Then we've got to ask Ms. Son. It's fair. It's a parliamentary process. Maybe there are people monitoring it, your investors and all that. They have a right to say, no, that's not true. I met you at the Wimpy Bar, remember? Down the road. So we have to give them the right to reply. So are we going the mania route or the chairperson's proposal route? Vilma, you want to quickly say something? Now, we're not going to vote on this. What do people feel? You want to go the mania route? Mania route? Okay, fine. If that's what the majority wants. Good? Right. So what we're going to do is break for lunch. We'll come back and continue with Steinhoff. We're not going to disorganize the workers here. So 13:30 to 14:30. We can make it 13:30 to 14:15. How about that? Nyami, you think you can have a full lunch in 45 minutes? Oh, okay. If Nyami can do it, we all can do it. Good. No, hang on. We are here now. We are here now because it's 13:15. Can people please use their watches? Or if you don't know, your cell phone has got a clock, right? Right. Over then to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Okay, I did not, there was a comment earlier about the number of lawyers, and I realized that we didn't explain who is here from Steinhoff and why they are here. We did not have or take that opportunity at the very beginning. I am here as a representative of the Supervisory Board, as the Chair of the Supervisory Board, and have an oversight function. Louis Dupree is here as a member of the Management Board that takes care of the day-to-day operations of the company. As I've explained before, in an NV structure, those are very specific functions that are prescribed that the two boards follow, and that is why he and I are both here today. Behind me is Robert Dryman, who is with Worksmans, and Robert Dryman sits between the company and PwC. So anything that occurs here today that is relevant to the PwC process, Robert has to be here for that process. To my right behind me is Terrell Murray. And Terrell is in charge of communications of the company. So to the extent that there's anything that occurs here that needs to be communicated on behalf of the company externally, Terrell is here to be able to manage that. So when I answer specifically from my oversight position, and I give an opportunity to Louis Dupree to see whether there's any further detail that he should add from his day-to-day perspective. I think the first and important point to make is that the members of the group that are currently involved with the group stepped into the situation in December to assist with the crisis. That's why we are here. I think also that the difference I experience here today is that I am sitting here as a representative of the company in all its functions, not simply, I think that the difference perhaps between my position and a position like the one that Mr. Lecranchi represents is currently he's representing his position. And I think that's an important distinction because it does put certain strictures around what I need to do and the responsibility I need to maintain in order to follow this process all the way through to its conclusion. We have said before, and I think the challenge is that the PwC process, the most important thing that they need to uncover, we've mentioned there are two important things. The one is to get us to the financial results because of the number of stakeholders we're looking after. And secondly, to provide evidence so that we can follow through on the cases. when that evidence is produced, it is handed over to the relevant authorities. That we have to do. Our case then is ongoing. It's not complete. We then have to go back to PwC and continue to uncover, work through all the companies, understand who was involved, and any of those processes that I reveal to too much of an extent puts us in a situation that we cannot follow through on that process. But the two things that I can say is that we are committed to the process and we will ensure that it is overseen. The second thing is that the company, me, myself, and all the other directors have made themselves subject to that investigation. So we have not said that being in these positions mean that we are now exempt from that process. The entire process is subject to their purview. So I just wanted to make those comments because there was a question with regards to our oversight and why we answer in the way we do. There's a very, very different set of circumstances that relate to the two entities representing or here today that you've just heard from. In terms of the details of the suspension and so on, I think I must hand that over to Louis to give some insight as far as that goes.
Thank you, Heather. Maybe just, I think there are three issues that I would like to comment on from the questions that were put to Mr. Legrandsie. Is the first is maybe to touch on a point that Heather made towards the end about governance and oversight, is that the PwC investigation is conducted via Worksmans. However, obviously they are consultants and they have to report to someone and take their instructions from someone. Now that is the supervisory board, but to ensure that the supervisory board remains independent in that sense, because as Heather correctly pointed out, there are members still on the board that was there on the 6th of December. The supervisory board has appointed a subcommittee that consists of 3 people, which is Mr. Peter Wacky, he's the deputy chair of the board, Moira Moses, and from a management board perspective, myself. So those are the 3 people that PwC engages with on a day-to-day basis. Secondly, dealing with Mr. Legrandsie's suspension, I think Mr. Legrandsie has answered that. I am not aware of that there's a dispute between the company and Mr. Legrandsie on that. Mr. Legrandsie did take part in a number of PwC interviews. I cannot offhand remember how many. He's fully cooperated with the PwC interviews and processes, and subsequent to a report that I referred earlier, which I then discussed, I made the call to Mr. Legrandsie. His services were suspended in the notice period. So, and that was subsequent to a discussion and a decision by the supervisory board. Then thirdly, dealing with Deloitte, is that Deloitte was appointed by the shareholders at the AGM at the recommendation of the company, and the reason that decision was made is because of something that Heather referred to, that it is of the utmost importance to get the financial statements out, and to get new auditors in at this stage is just a task of impossibility. It was important to get these within the timelines that we've already lined out. To get someone out in new would just made it impossible. And what I think that is a good point, thanks Heather, is that what was done at the insistence of the company is that the people who previously worked on this assignment was removed from the assignment, and a fresh team from Deloitte, which is headed up by Mr. Johan Hopmans in the Amsterdam office. He's the head audit partner on this matter.
Moving into question answer, 3 questions maximum, within 3 minutes maximum. Over to questions to Mr. Ben Legrandsie, so we finish off with that. We'll come back, Mr. Legrandsie, you have to stay till the end, obviously. Yeah. Okay, go for it, Mr. Mania, Thandi. And Nati, you had your hand up. No. Okay, and Vilma will come in at the end as the chairs, right? We come in at the end.
Chair, in your response, you said that in your view, and you chose your words carefully, Marcus Jooste, that there was limited sharing of information. In what respect was there limited sharing of information? First question. Second question, your claim is that you first became aware of the fraud on the 2nd of December 2017. But you do also, in your response, make reference to the incident in Germany, which began, as if I recall, in about 2015. And you said that Marcus Jooste gave you comfort, presumably about the investigation going on in Germany. Now, at the time, you were the group CFO. Did you yourself ever scrutinize what you referred to as the opinions produced by the specialists in Germany? Did you scrutinize those reports yourself? Did you immerse yourself in the details? And what additional measures did you put in place in your capacity as CFO to deal with what was going on in Germany? And then finally, I mean, given the fact that this is alleged to be one of the biggest corporate scandals in the history of South Africa, have you been interviewed formally by the Hawks or any other regulator in respect of this matter? Thank you.
Thandi?
Chair, I hope there was no gentleman agreement between what has happened between the suspension and so on, because I'm still not clear and I don't want to keep on harping on this question. But let me get to the point. Mr. Lekranji says that the board approves numbers. Surely if the board approves numbers, somebody submit the numbers to the board for approval, you see? And that is a great area. We're not sure who does that. But in the same vein, and Nikki will be interested at some point, I might not be hands-on on this, but you see, profit margins, much as they're not predetermined, assumptions are made. And sometimes it's on the basis of those assumptions that certain decisions can be taken that reflects the risk appetite of a company. I'm making that comment, Nikki, because at some point we might want to come to discuss this. But surely there's also a unit that detects if there's an inflation in numbers or whether the numbers are up. It just doesn't happen out of nowhere. And you can't tell me that there's a company of this magnitude that does not have a system that detects whether in terms of the profit margins there was an inflation or not. And furthermore, I will want to know whether this was reported to the JSC, which I suspect was not. Now, and I'm
You've reached your 3 questions, but quickly, I'll summarize. And then,
no, Chair, then that's fine. I'll come back.
we give you another 3 questions.
My main questions still remain with Steinhoff anyway.
We're coming to them.
The follow-up.
We're dealing with Ben Lekranji. 3 questions, David. We agreed with questions approach.
No, thanks.
Was it Nkuleko?
No, thanks, Comrade
Okay,
Chair. I just want to make a follow-up on what Mr. Lekranji said on how his scheme or the scheme of Steinhoff worked, because it's a pyramid scheme. One, whether how these acquisitions of the new assets and shares, one, was it part of the strategy or policy, whether there was a policy decision. Because my understanding how the system works is like when you do the hedging, you have an asset that the real value probably, let's say it's 100 rand, and you acquire it maybe probably at 20 rands. And after some, whatever time lapse, then it changes. That's one. Secondly, what was the authorization process around the acquisition that led to the inflation? Remember you said that the parent company or the holding company, rather than to have the real financial capability, it will be the one that does the dummy, let me use it, the dummy borrowings, so that you can be able to get the other one. And then lastly, how does the authorization came about ultimately to say, indeed, either the asset is now belonging to us, who makes that? Is it your treasury, whether is it your board? Because there's issues around those irregularities and accountability system, because we have to be able to say what is the center of some of the challenges like you painted. without actually getting to issues that from a legal point of view, but from a systems point of view, policy point of view, and governance, because that's what you painted, how your scheme will work.
Very valuable questions, really. Mkuleko.
Thanks, Chair. 2 questions. Mr. Lekhanchi, you spoke about you receiving information, analysis, and so on. And that's for me where I have a problem. So in this whole time of analysis, you had a Damascene moment only on the 2nd of December. What kind of analysis was being done? I take very cold comfort in the fact that this was an event and not a process. I think that in itself speaks to weaknesses of your own office and your own processes which you followed. And I really would like to be clarified as to how in good faith you can say it was only at that point, whereas all along you'd been doing, analysis and the broad strokes in which you have actually painted. Secondly, Chair, you place a lot of emphasis on the fact that the auditing by small companies is probably the alpha and omega of why this crisis actually happened. It seems to be the fallback position that had somebody bigger, had somebody bigger, had somebody bigger. Did you ever raise this in your capacity? Because you said it was a culture that had been there for a very long time. And so what was your intervention to address something which you are holding very dear now as to be the actual reason as to why this has happened, unless it is, of course, something which arises out of hindsight. But I'm quite interested to know as to when that realization came about, and if it came about during the course of you doing your work, with whom did you raise it with, and what responses did you get, if you raised it at all?
Who's next for 3 questions each? Vilma?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lekhanchi, for your presentation. My question to you, because you are responsible for the Africa block. Now, the PIC is where our public service pensions, they are tasked to invest the money, and they invested it in Steinhoff. So what is your relationship with PIC as an investor and their concerns as well? When you raised your concerns, did you contact the PIC or did you communicate it with them? Now, secondly, you said that you do not see to the contracts. You don't see the contracts if there are any problems with contracts. The audit companies, the small companies, see to that. Did at any time the audit company, who, if they were concerned about a contract, did they inform you? They must have seen they have a problem with the contracts. Did they tell you about that? And if they did you do anything about it to prevent the problem from happening at that time? Thank you, Chair.
Just to say we got a bit all right. It was a question answer immediately, right? It's my fault, actually. But it's interesting. Nobody says, hey, what are you guys up to, Chairs? Sorry about that. But as it's happened, the questions are very precise. Mr. Lekhanchi answered them precisely. I apologize for that, but it just flowed because I think we're desperate to finish. It's already 1:30, but reply precisely. And if you don't, then each person, starting with who was the first person? You. So what we'll do now to accommodate the failure on my part, and I take responsibility, is you're going to answer, and if he's not happy, he's going to ask you. Not new questions, to answer the 3 questions he's asked, okay? Good. Right, over to you.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So on the first question, Marcus used the limited sharing of information. So what I meant with that is there were certain relationships between him and third parties where that relationship was not disclosed to the company or myself. And had I known what that relationship, that it was actually one whereby he controlled the third party, I would have accounted for that transaction differently. When Marcus Jooste gave me comfort on the investigation in Germany, yes, I did scrutinize the specialist report. It's a very complex matter. It's been ongoing now since 2015. But the reports I did scrutinize as it was tabled at the board, and if there was anything in them that I didn't understand, I would ask Mr. Jooste for explanation on it, and he was always willing and able to give me whatever questions I have. The additional measures, that was actually a tax investigation on specific transactions relating to intellectual property that transpired over I might be incorrect, but I think 3 years, 3 different years. So it was once-off transaction, so there wasn't actually corrective measures. It wasn't something that reoccurred that we had to correct. It was specifically the sale of intellectual property between entities within that European group. Just 1 second, I just want to consult quickly. Apologies, yes, I was interviewed by the FSB.
Conduct Authority, right? So he's answered the questions. Right.
I just want to confirm you have not been approached or interviewed by the Hawks.
No, I have not.
All right, General Khanna, you'll have to answer that. Why? But not now, when you appear. Yes, now it's Tandi's 3 questions.
Yeah,
precisely, because Tandi will then ask you a question for lasting 3.5 minutes. Okay? For our sakes.
Honourable Chair, I've got all the questions that all the honourable members ask me, except when it gets to this honourable member, I seem to have missed the questions.
Precisely ask the questions quickly, and you answer immediately. Right. First question.
You see, Mr. Lecrange is avoiding my question. You see, Mr. Lecrange said that the board approved numbers. And I asked, who gave the numbers to the board to approve? It's not a very difficult question. I'll go to the others.
Who gave the numbers, Mr. Lecrange?
So the numbers would be given by the financial reporting team. It will be put together and then presented in a board pack to members of the board.
No, Chair, he must not make me to ask him who does the financial reporting team report to.
Yeah, please answer the question.
He must not do that.
Fully.
The financial reporting team reports to me on a Steinhoff international level.
Next question.
The next question, Chair, the next question is about detection of inflated numbers. I asked whether is there a specific team, and when I ask if there's a specific team, I want to relate that team to him, so that I can understand when that team actually did inflate the numbers and did report to him. Because if he evades that question, he must remember Rule 168, eh? Because I'm going to
can you
him
answer
down
that
on
question,
one.
please?
Can you just ask the question again? I really don't understand it.
Simply, yeah.
Yeah, I said I'm not smart. I'm going to try to be... Chair, the profit margins were inflated. It's a fact. It's not an issue for discussion anymore. Now, I want to know whether there's a tool in the company that detects that. And if at all there is, to who does it report? And in this case, did they do that? And I even asked a further question whether the JSC was aware of that, because they deal with risk appetite.
Thank you, Honourable Member, I understand. So no, there would not be a tool to pick up that profit margins are inflated. The way the profit margin would work is if it's 7% the 1 year, and the next year there's growth in top line, then it will still stay around about a 7% level, so your margin would not point out that there's additional of these false income in the numbers. Even though in euro terms, there will be more euros of false numbers. I'm not sure if that maybe explains it to you.
I'm sorry, Chair. You see, this is the gentleman who told me about an analytical procedure. But let me leave it.
It'll be unfair to the other members because now it's...
That's what I'm saying. Let me leave it. I'll come to it because he said that he does analytical procedures.
Right. Your last question? Or you done? Okay. Mashlobo, can you please reply?
Just one question from the honourable member that I haven't answered yet. No, the JSE would not be able to know this.
Mr. Mashlobo asked you questions. Please answer.
On the authorization process around acquisitions, so the way it would work is there's an investment committee that sits once a month consisting of the majority of CEOs of the companies that's disclosed on the slide to you. And these CEOs would then evaluate what to buy, what the price should be that it's bought at, and the majority of transactions would pass the investment committee in order for it to be implemented. However, where we already had a stake in a company, if you take the company owning the intellectual property that Mr. De Pre referred to earlier, we already owned a stake in that company of, if I recall, 40% or 45%. And therefore the subsequent acquisition or increase in stake would not go to the investment committee again because the original purpose to invest in it was already approved by the investment committee. To implement some of these increases in investments that would be done by the Treasury function upon instruction from the CEO or the CFO, depending on what transaction we are talking about. Did I answer all your questions?
Then
No, thanks, Chair. There is one that is not answering. Remember, this was, you could see, it's a structured, purposeful. The issue of the holding company, knowing exactly the financial position, if you had an investment committee, plus, I suppose, the risk management, was it a policy? And was it a strategy where you intended to maximize profits or influence or expansion at any cost? That's what I want, at least the one around.
That's very fair,
Yeah.
very fair. Please reply.
No, it was not a strategy of the company to inflate profits.
I mean, Comrade Chair, with your permission, remember you have a holding company, you have a board, we have these senior top executives that are there. One of the things that normally people do to maximize profit or influence or expansion, there is an authority. Which structure, I don't want names, I want the structure that gives authority to use the holding company in terms of using of the dummy acquisitions. The one around investment committee, I'm okay.
Very fair question. It's about systems and structures.
Yeah, a dummy company that was used a number of times in what you refer to, Honourable Member, as dummy transactions was the Steinhoff Europe company in Europe.
Mr. Schlankwas, questions, please. The last one.
No, I've already replied to all three questions. Oh, the next member. Yeah, on the receiving of information and the process and event, you must bear in mind that at least in my view, and the company can respond by themselves, but this practice commenced a number of years ago. So therefore, if there was false profit that was in the system that started way, way, way back, if you grow that false profit every year, no person, no auditor, no analyst will certainly just by looking at the numbers tell you, but here's something that changes suddenly this year, here's false income. Because it started so long ago and just every year it gets increased a little bit. It's not as if there's a huge jump in profits. So from my side, when I get the consolidated information, to your point which you raised saying you do not believe me, but when I get the consolidated information, I look at how are we doing against the budget that was approved by the supervisory board and how are we doing against prior year. And year on year, there's no material movement where something jumps up with 10% that raises a flag for me to ask the question. It always increases just a little bit. And that is because, in my view, this practice was already going on a long, long time ago. Or it started a long, long time ago. The audited by small companies. Yes, it was actually raised in my capacity as CFO. So we went out to marketplace to go on tender to give the full audit to people we invite on tender, and we only invited large firms to come to the tender. At the point in time when we wanted to award the tender, we had an internal meeting with the head of the audit committee, and the CEO convinced the head of the audit committee as well as myself that in certain places we should retain these small firms because of language barriers and the relationship they've got with the staff internally. And that's why we then awarded the audit to Deloitte, but we retained in smaller countries like Germany, Hungary, Austria, smaller audit firms.
Take in Vilma's questions now, the co-chair.
Yeah, on the PIC relationship, so the PIC has always been the largest or second largest shareholder of Steinhoff, institutional shareholder. There's also a strategic relationship between Steinhoff and the PIC in terms of which we were trying to actually build a large focus between a corporate and the PIC on promoting black suppliers into the retail environment and also promoting black suppliers into using financial services products, not loans, but more technology products. And through this partnership, we decided, first of all, that we must allow the Lancaster Group to become a shareholder of Steinhoff. Lancaster is a company which is partly owned by the PIC and Jayendra Naidu, and that happened in 2016. We also then allowed the Lancaster Group to raise funding through PIC guarantees, if I understand the structure 100%, to become a shareholder in the Star Group upon the listing of Star in September 2017. But the whole purpose was actually to ask the PIC to put X amount on the table for Lancaster to come in as a shareholder of Star, and then Steinhoff would put the same amount on the table in order to promote the supplier development program and also assist Lancaster to increase its stake. So in short, the relationship with the PIC has always historically been a good one. When things happened, we did not inform the PIC immediately, but we did have meetings with the PIC subsequent to these events, or the company did. Then on the contracts of the small auditing firm, no, I was not informed that there's anything suspicious about the contracts with the companies that the small auditing firm audited.
Well, you can speak afterwards. You decide as the majority. It's 14:30. We'll be back. Alan, where are you? Or Teboho? Yeah. Where's the lunch? It's outside. Okay. You have enough lunch there, I hope. Otherwise, can you please run and take what you can? That's the way Parliament works. Thank you. Bye.